Hello and welcome to Narayana Eyes. I am Pratik, your faculty for daily news analysis. Students, let us start today's DNA session with a motivation quote. And what is today's quote? The quote says that, why worry if you have done the best, then you don't have to worry. Worrying won't make it any better. If you want to be successful, respect one rule: never let failure take control of you. The essence of the motivational quote is do your very best, right? Doing your best is in your hands. Success or failure is not in your hand. So make sure you're doing your best, right? And in case you fail, never allow failure to take control of your life. Even if you fail, it's okay. Try hard. Adopt different ways, different methods, but never allow failure to demoralize you, to break you, to shackle you. Keep on trying, and one day you will achieve success. Right? So, let us start today's DNA. Right? Now, in today's DNA, we have selected four most important topics from the Hindu and the Indian Express. We have taken three topics from the Hindu and one topic from the Indian Express. So, let's have a quick brief about the topics that we shall be discussing in today's DNA session. Now, the first article, right? The title of the first topic is From a Republic to a Republic of Unequals. This article tries to highlight the fact that how the current social and economic state is in violation of the promise that we had 75 years back. How the current social and economic state is in violation of the ideals or objectives of the constitution. The second article talks about the corneal blindness and how this is emerging as a major issue in our country, right? The third article talks about the high seas treaty, right? It talks about the regulation of human activities in the high seas, that is in the oceans. And the fourth article talks about the reason why the income tax has introduced PAN card, that is PAN 2.0. These are the four topics that we shall be discussing in today's daily session. So let us start with the first topic, and the title is From a Republic to a Republic of Unequals, right? Now in this article we shall be understanding the difference, or rather how we have deviated, right? How we, that is India, has deviated from the constitutional ideals, right? How the neoliberal economic policies have undermined the constitutional promise or the ideals that we had set forth in front of us in the year 1950 when our constitution was adopted. Right? You may mark this topic under GS paper 2. Now, a question was asked in the year 2021. Constitutional morality is rooted in the constitution itself and is founded on its essential facets, right? So the key terms, right, in the constitution or any news that is surrounding the topic of constitution can be asked in the UPSC examination. So let us start the topic. What is the context? November 26th, 2024. India celebrated 75th anniversary of our constitution, which means it's been 75 years, or 75 years back we adopted or we drafted our constitution. We are celebrating 75th anniversary of our constitution, right? Now, the topic that we shall be discussing today highlights the evolution of India's constitutional framework. So, it highlights the evolution of India's constitutional framework. What does it mean? It means that Back then in the year 1950, when we adopted our constitution, right, the vision of our country was to make India into an egalitarian society. Egalitarian, what does it mean? Which means to make India an equal society. We all know that there are so many differences or discriminations that happen in the name of religion, caste. So the vision was that our country should be an equal society, equal country, which means there should be no discrimination in the name of religion, caste, etc. Each and everyone should be treated equally. Each and everyone should have the access to education, government jobs, resources, etc. However, however, the fact of the matter is that 75 years later, the situation of our country is that the social and economic inequality is widening. This is a fact that we are living in. Even after 75 years, people are discriminated in the name of religion, caste. Economic inequality, talking about economic inequality, the difference between the rich and the poor is widening or growing year on year. The vision that we had when our constitution came into being and the truth about today's times that we are living in is completely opposite, right? So what are the reasons, that India or the situation has led wherein there's a stark inequality in our country? What are the reasons, what are the issues behind it? We are going to understand in today's DNA session, right? Now, the intellectual foundation of the constitution, right? Now, when we were drafting our constitution, right, we had different perspectives. That is, what is Constituent Assembly? It is the assembly that made our constitution, that drafted our constitution. The members of Constituent Assembly, the purpose of Constituent Assembly was to draft constitution to our country. So the members of Constituent Assembly, they came from different backgrounds, right? The members were left wing, right wing. So left wing are those people who fight for an egalitarian society, who are liberal in their approach, right? Who call for the maximum intervention of the state. And the right wing are conservatist, which means they call for national consciousness. They want minimal intervention of the state. So the members came from different political hues, right? But there's one unified goal. And what was that common goal? That we need to have a unified political system. Despite the fact that members came from different political hues, different background, the objective was clear. What was objective? That we need to have a unified political system, which means we need to have one strong government that should govern the entire country. Like we have today, we have union government that controls or that governs the entire country. So the purpose, the goal was to create a unified political system, right? At the same time, keeping into mind the diversity of our country, it was important to accommodate the cultural distinctiveness of people belonging to different culture, right? For example, India is a land of great diversity. People have different cultures, different diversity, right? Different traditions, culture. So we also accommodate all the diversity traditions, culture, and made it a part of the constitution. Which means the constitution promised people belonging to different cultures that the constitution protects your traditions and cultures. The goal was to make India or to have a unified political system that will govern or manage our country. Now, despite the fact that members of Constituent Assembly came from different backgrounds, we adopted a liberal framework, which means that we adopted a liberal framework where freedom and individuality, or for that matter liberty, was given due importance. When we adopted our constitution, the focus was on the freedom and liberty of people. At the same time, given the social and economic inequalities of our country back then in the year 1950, or when India got independent, there was poverty in our country, widespread poverty. Keeping the social and economic condition in mind, the members of Constituent Assembly realized the fact that the role of state is very, very important to reduce the inequalities. Right? Which means the members of Constituent Assembly emphasize the role of the state to reduce the existing inequalities in the country. That's the reason the state was given due importance, or the role of the state was enhanced. The role of the state was made more prominent. Why? To reduce the inequalities. Which means we adopted a unified political system, federal state, right? At the same time, we adopted, which means we made a balance, we made a mixed balance between the individual autonomy and the power of the state. Power of the state, or the role of the state to reduce inequalities. Now, once the constitution was drafted and adopted, right? The Constitution of India, right? It aligned the constitution of a country aligned with John Rawls. Who is John Rawls? He's a philosopher. John Rawls' principle of egalitarian liberalism, which means our constitution aligned with John Rawls' principle of egalitarian liberalism. And what is egalitarian liberalism? See, egalitarian is equal society. Liberalism is giving importance to liberty of an individual. Now, this principle emphasized what? Equal basic liberties. That is, every individual will have liberty and freedom to pursue his career as per his potential. Which means the state, for example, let's say every person has a right to choose his or her religion. Right? Every person has a right to choose the field in which he or she wants to make a career in. Right? So, equal basic liberties. Every individual, irrespective of religion, caste, creed, color, will have equal liberties. One. Second, equal opportunities. Every person, irrespective of the background he or she is coming from, will have equal opportunity with respect to health, education, social security, etc. And then difference principle. What is the difference principle? Now, this difference principle, it states that inequality in a country is justified as long as it is benefiting the most disadvantaged community. Right? I repeat, difference principle states that inequality in a country is justified as long as the marginalized or the most disadvantaged community is getting the maximum benefit. For example, let's say there's a system wherein the elite people or the wealthy people, right, they are being taxed more, or let's say the job they are doing is stimulating the economy, which means it is creating more and more jobs. Let's say, for example, the wealthy people are manufacturing or establishing more and more factories. Now establishing more and more factories, which means creation of new jobs, creation of more number of jobs, which means inequality is justified as long as the most disadvantaged community is getting the maximum benefit. This is what we understand by the term difference principle, right? And then to incorporate all these principles and make it as part of Indian Constitution, or rather all these principles were made a part of the Indian Constitution. For example, let's say we have the fundamental rights. Part 3 of Indian Constitution belongs to fundamental rights. For example, Article 14 to Article 18, right to equality, that is equal basic liberty, right? Then 19, freedom, it talks again about liberty, right? Then we Article 23 and 24, Article 25 to 28. Now, all these principles or all these fundamental rights, they align with John Rawls' principle of egalitarian liberalism. Then these are the fundamental rights. What about the DPSPs? What is DPSP? Directive Principles of the State Policy, right? Directive Principles of the State Policy. Now, Article 38 Clause 2, it directs the state to minimize the inequality. To minimize the inequality in income, status, opportunities. Article 38(2). To minimize inequality. Then Article 39 Clause C, again a part of DPSP. It directs the state to devise the economic system that should prevent the concentration of wealth in the hands of few people, which means the economic system should not be exploitative, which means the economic system that we draft or make for a country should not result wherein wealth is being concentrated in the hands of only few people, which means the economic system should be such that it should benefit the majority of the population. This is what Article 39 Clause C stands for. So all these principles of John Rawls' egalitarian liberalism, we incorporated into a constitution as part of fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy. Now, keeping into mind the ideals of a constitution, the Supreme Court time and again has emphasized the importance of the constitution ideals or the objective that the constitution makers had for a country. For example, in the D.S. Nakara and others versus Union of India case of 1982, the Supreme Court emphasized the role of state in enhancing the standard of living of people, which means in the year 1982, the Supreme Court said that the role of state is very, very important to enhance the standard of living of people, which means the constitution of a country, it envisages our country to be a welfareist state. Ours is a welfarist state, which means the government that we elect works for the welfare of people. Again, in the Air India Statutory Corporation versus United Labour Union, 1996, the Supreme Court was of the opinion that the constitution makers envisaged an egalitarian society, which means the government of the day has to work towards making our country into an egalitarian, that is equal society, wherein the government strives to remove or reduce the inequalities, be these social inequalities or economic inequalities. So these are some of the judicial interpretation which calls for a welfare state that removes or reduces the social and economic inequalities. But which means so far what we have discussed and understood is that the constitution makers had envisaged, had imagined our country to be an equal society, right? But however, the current reality is different. Now, why the current reality is different? Because in the year 1991, in the year 1991, India adopted LPG reforms, that is liberalization, privatization and globalization, which means post 1991, Indian economy was not a closed economy, which means post 1991, the role of state reduced significantly. The role of state reduced significantly, which means now the economy of our country was driven by the market forces. Now this adoption of LPG reforms resulted in the growing inequality between the rich and the poor. Which means these 1991 economic reforms led to growing inequality in our country. Now, let me just give some data, to understand how the inequality grew in our country, right? For example, in the year 1930, in the year 1930s, the top 1%, earned less than 22% of the total income. The top 1% owned less than 22% of the total income generated in the country. Then in the 1980s, this number got reduced to 6%, which means the inequality was decreasing. Why? Because of the initiatives taken by the state, right? The role of the state, right, was more post independence and before 1991, right? So the inequality, because of the welfarist policies of the state, the inequality was reducing. But post 1991, that is post 1991, that is up to 2022, right? The top 1% owned wealth close to 22%. Look at this number. Before independence, it was 22%. Post independence, it got reduced to 6%. But post liberalization, that is post this economic liberalization, right, the inequality rose to pre-independence level. Now the state of inequality in India report of the year 2022 states that the top 10% of Indians, they they make more than 3 lakh annually. Which means the rest 90% people are earning less than 25,000 per month. 90% of our population is is earning less than 25,000. This is per monthly, of course, per monthly, right? Now, especially post the economic liberalization of the year 1991, right? What we see is that there is growing inequality year by year in our country. Now, let us try to understand how the economic inequality overlaps with the social inequality, right? Which means because of the economic inequality, or rather because of, what do you mean by when economic inequality overlaps social inequality? Which means because of the economic inequality, because of the widening gap between the rich and the poor, this also affects the social inequality. For example, of the upper caste, the so-called upper caste, they hold 90% of the billionaire wealth. 90% of the billionaire wealth. The upper caste, they hold 90% of the billionaire wealth. There is no representation of the scheduled tribes. And the rest 10% OBCs and the SCs, they contribute 10% to the billionaire's wealth. Now, in the year 2000, we had 9 billionaires in our country. But in the year 2022, we have 119 billionaires in our country. At the same time, from the year 2014 to 2022, from the year 14 to 2022, the upper caste share of wealth, right? The upper caste share of wealth grew from 80% to 90%. All these data indicates the fact that the upper caste people are contributing significantly to our country's wealth. The economic inequality is overlapping with social inequality. This is what the overlap of economic and social inequality. When I said that the economic inequality overlaps with social inequality, which means based on the social category you belong to, that corresponds to your economic status. Because if you see, there is disproportionate contribution or presence of the upper caste in the country's wealth. Which means the data that we have seen, it indicates that there is a contradiction between the constitution ideals. What are the constitution ideals? Liberty, equality, fraternity, and the neoliberal policies that led to the growing inequality of a country. Dr. Ambedkar, during the Constituent Assembly debates, had warned the country that the social and economic inequality could undermine political democracy. The social and economic inequality could undermine political democracy, which means if there is social and economic inequality, there is no point, or political democracy would become totally redundant. Why? Which means if you are not equal socially and economically, there is no meaning of the term political democracy. There is no meaning of the term political democracy. So, what is the way forward? In order to get rid of this social and economic inequality, What is the way forward? To strengthen welfare state mechanism, that is to increase the funding on public goods like health, education and social security. Then tax reforms, which means we need to adopt progressive tax reforms wherein the wealthy people are taxed more. At the same time, we also need to address the tax evasion, that is the way people evade or escape from paying taxes. Then affirmative action and social justice, which means here it is very important to ensure that the most needy people, the disadvantaged, the marginalized community should get the benefits of reservation, right? Now many people or like many experts, they criticize the reservation system of our country. Why? Because in the reservation system, despite the fact that we have come a long way, right? It's been 75 years since the time we adopted constitution, right? The SCs and STs were given reservation, right? Immediately post India got independent, and then in the 80s even the OBCs got reservation. Despite the fact that the reservation is given to 50% of the population, there are segments, there are certain uh, populations or certain societies, certain classes, certain castes that are still not given the benefit of reservation, which means the most needy people should be given the benefit of reservation. Then reform the political economy. Now the political economy should align with the constitution ideals, which means the economic policies of a country should be devised in such a way that should lead to social and political equality. And finally, promoting social equity, which means we have to address the discrimination, we have to address the barriers in our country, which means the we have to help the civil society organizations, the NGOs that are fighting against caste discrimination. So these are some of the ways through which we can ensure that the vision of the constitution makers come true one day. This is really very unfortunate that despite 75 years, we are battling some of the most significant problems like poverty, health crisis, pollution, right? Then growing social and economic inequalities that will, that will result in distress in the country. It will disturb the law and order of our country, right? So let us try to discuss a question. So it will help you. So as it will help you to understand the type of questions that UPSC may ask in the examination. Examine the evolution of the Indian constitution from a liberal framework to one that acknowledges and addresses socio-economic inequalities. How has the constitution's vision of an egalitarian society been challenged by neoliberal policies? Right? Now, to start with, in the introduction, try to highlight the fact that it's been 75 years since the day we adopted our constitution, right? And the fact of the matter is, even after 75 years, the inequality, the social and economic inequality in our country is widening, and we have to address this growing inequality, right? Then in the body of the answer, try to highlight the fact that India adopted liberal framework wherein the constitution gave a very prominent and dominant role to the state to reduce the inequalities. At the same time, to address the social inequality, the constitution incorporated certain features as part of fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy. Then you have to highlight the challenges to an egalitarian society. For example, the adoption of neoliberal economic policies, the reduction of the role of the state in welfare policies, right? And finally, in the conclusion, again, you have to ensure that you can mention the way forward through which we can ensure that the political and economic policies that the government of India should align with the constitution ideals of our country or constitution ideals of the constitution makers. This is how you frame or write the answer, right? Now, if you want a detailed explanation of the answer, I request you to open the link provided in the comment box. The link will take you to the website where you'll have a detailed analysis or detailed explanation of this particular question, right? Okay. Now, the next issue, the next topic. What is the title? The title is An Ideal Way to Treat India's Corneal Blindness Problem, right? So, we'll try to understand the corneal blindness problem in our country, and you may mark this particular topic under GS paper 2, that is issues relating to development and management of social services relating to health. Now, a question was asked on Zika virus, right? So, question on, let's say, health crisis diseases can be asked in the UPSC examination, right? So, what is the context? The context is that the problem of corneal blindness, the problem of corneal blindness is increasing in our country. Corneal blindness, right? Which means the demand for corneal transplantation, the demand for corneal transplantation is not met by the supply of cornea transplantation or by the supply of cornea, which means there is shortage of donor corneas in our country. See, what is cornea? Cornea is the outermost part of the eye. What is cornea? It is the outermost part of the eye. You can see over here, this is the outermost part of the eye and this is referred to as cornea. Now, because of the disorder or because of an issue in the cornea, it leads to corneal blindness, and corneal blindness in future leads to vision impairment, which means you cannot see anything. Why? Because the light is not passing through the cornea. This is what we understand by in a layman's language by the term corneal blindness. It is the outermost part of the eye, right? And because of a disorder in the cornea, it is leading to corneal blindness, which impairs or which prevents the vision. I hope you understood the context. And there is a growing demand of replacement or transplantation of cornea, but the demand is not being met by supply. This is the context. So, what is corneal blindness? I hope you understood what is corneal blindness. Now, we'll try to understand the prevalence of corneal blindness in India. See, of all the total blindness, of all the blindness in our country, corneal blindness contributes to 25%. Of all the total blindness, corneal blindness contributes 25% to the overall blindness in our country. Second, there is regional disparities, which means the problem of corneal blindness is more prevalent in the rural areas. Why? Because of the absence of eye care clinic or hospitals in the rural areas. Now, every year there is a transplantation demand of cornea to the tune of 1 lakh. There is 1 lakh transplantation demand every year in our country, of which we are able to meet only 50,000, which means there is a shortage of 50,000 transplantation of corneas. And that's the reason the government of our country is trying to rework in the policies so as to address the shortage problem or shortage issue of corneas in our country. Now, There are two approaches through which corneas can be transplanted. The first one is required request model. Now, under this required request model, right, the counselors of a hospital, they visit the families of a deceased individual. Let's say a person has died. Now, the counselor of an eye hospital visits the family of that dead person and takes permission from their family to take the cornea from the person who is now dead. Now, this method is considered to be ethical. Why? Because the consent of the family is taken. So, it is considered to be an ethical model. Now, there is a case study, for example, in the LV Prasad Eye Institute in the Ramayama International Eye Bank Hospital in Hyderabad, right? This particular eye bank has collected 1,40,000 corneas in the last 35 years, and they collected this corneas under this particular model, wherein the counselors or staff of the hospital, they visit the families of a deceased person and takes the corneas. This model is prevalent in the state of Andhra Pradesh, Telangana as well as Odisha. This is the first system. But again, this system is not helping us to meet the demand. That's the reason we are, or the experts have proposed another solution. And what is that? That is the presumed consent model. Now, in this model, it will be presumed that the individual has already given the consent unless he explicitly denies it. In this model, it is presumed that the individual has given the consent unless he explicitly denies it. Right? Now, the experts have pointed or noted that this model will help us to meet the growing demand of cornea transplantation. Right? Now, this model will help us to increase the availability of cornea in our country. Right? Now, to adopt this particular model, the government of India needs to make an amendment in the Transplantation of Human Organs and Tissues Act of 1994. So, please remember the name of this particular act. I hope you understood the article and understood the issue of cornea transplantation. Now, a practice question. The prevalence of corneal blindness is higher in rural areas due to limited access to quality eye care. I request you to answer in the comment box. Please, either you can also click the link in the comment box, go to the website and try to attempt the question in our website. So, the annual demand for corneal transplants in India is approximately 1 lakh, while 50,000 transplants are performed each year. Under the current system, hospital cornea retrieval program are implemented where grief counselors request explicit consent for cornea donation from the families of deceased individuals. All the three statements are correct, which means 1, 2 and 3, which means option D is the correct answer for this particular question, right? Next question. The question is, why income tax department has introduced PAN 2.0? Now, in this article is not that very important for the UPSC examination, but UPSC can ask a question on PAN and how PAN 2.0 is different from the PAN that we are currently having, right? This topic is important for GS paper 3, that is Sorry, so this is a part of GS paper. GS paper 2, important aspects of governance, transparency and accountability, e-governance. So it is important for GS paper 2, governance. Now, a question was asked in the year 2013, electronic cash transfer system for the welfare schemes is an ambitious project to minimize corruption, eliminate wastage and facilitate reforms. Comment, right? Now, what is the context? The context is that the Union Cabinet has approved PAN 2.0, right? The purpose of integrating PAN 2.0 is to integrate all other, cards or all other, let's say we have PAN for the companies that deduct the income at source where TDS is deducted, or let's say for the ones uh, who are engaged in the stock market, they get this TIN number. So this PAN 2.0 tries to integrate all the other methods or all the other facilities that we have in our country, right? Which means the union government has approved to launch or implement PAN 2.0. First and foremost, what is PAN? PAN is a 10-digit, very, very important. If a question comes, this will be the statement in the question. 10-digit alphanumeric identifier, right? It's a 10-digit alphanumeric identifier which links all the financial payments. It links all the financial payments of an individual, or let's say a business person. The financial information of an individual or let's say a business is linked with the PAN, and who launches or who gives this PAN card? It is the income tax department. Income tax department, right, is the one that gives people the PAN card, right? Now, this PAN links your tax payments. For example, whenever you file income tax returns, you have to submit PAN card. Why? Because this PAN card has the details or links of all your financial payments. Then TDS or TCS credits, filing income tax returns, specified financial transactions. And once, which means in short, it links all your financial payments into one system, that is one PAN card. And once a PAN card is given to you, it cannot be changed for the lifetime. Once you get a PAN number, that PAN number will stay with you until the end of your life. So all these facts are important. In case a question is asked on PAN, such type of questions will be asked from this particular PPT slide. Now, why was PAN 2.0 introduced? One, as I told you, we still have TAN, then TIN number. So these are different types of numbers that are generated, right, for different purpose. For example, this is for the tax deduction at source, right? These are different numbers. Now this PAN 2.0, which means as of now we have PAN card, then we have TAN, then we have TIN. Now this PAN 2.0 will integrate all these identification numbers under one single card. One. Second, the current PAN card is 15 to 20 years old, which means in order to upgrade the PAN card with the technology that we have today, we have introduced or launched PAN 2.0. Then under PAN 2.0, there will be mandatory PAN data vault system, which stores your data in a very secured manner, Data privacy. In short, it will ensure data privacy. A unified portal wherein you can interact with all the government departments seamlessly. Government department seamlessly, which means having a PAN card through which you can interact with all the government departments, right? It makes your work easy. Why? Because it will be totally paperless. At the same time, if you need to get PAN, right, you can get the PAN through online portal. You don't have to go to the office. Now everything is being digitalized. Everything is being digitalized, right? Then we have grievance redressal mechanism which was absent in the PAN 1.0. At the same time, the PAN 2.0 will integrate the QR code, which means just by scanning the QR code, every information will be made available. This is PAN 2.0 and this is how PAN 2.0 is different from PAN 1.0. So all these points mean the same that we discussed in the last slide. So you can please read all these points from the DNA notes that will be available on our website, or you can please check it in the comment box. Now let's solve a question. PAN is a 10-digit alphanumeric identifier issued by the Income Tax Department of India. Yes, the statement is correct. Once allotted, the PAN can be changed or updated based on the individual's request. This one is incorrect. This one is incorrect. This one is correct. So option A is the correct answer for this particular question. The last topic. The title is Between Hope and Hurdles on the High Seas. Now in this article, we'll understand the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Agreement. What exactly is this agreement? And you may mark this under GS paper 2, that is important international institutions, agencies and their mandate. Now the question can be asked on the important agreements like the agreement on agriculture, agreement on the application of sanitary and phytosanitary measures, right? That's the reason a question can also be asked on the this particular agreement, right? Now, what is the context? The context is that India has recently signed what? Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction, BBIN agreement. This agreement is also referred to as High Seas Treaty. High Seas Treaty. What is the objective of this particular treaty? The objective is to protect the marine ecosystem, that is to preserve the life under the water, plants, animals, right, etc. At the same time, the purpose objective of this agreement is to ensure that the marine resources are used sustainably. This is the purpose objective of this particular agreement. And this agreement is considered to be one of global importance. Why? Because this agreement, it addresses the ocean governance issues. It addresses the ocean governance issues. It ensures that the resources are used sustainably. That's the reason this agreement is considered to be one of global importance. But unfortunately, there are challenges with respect to this agreement. Why? Because implementation is a major hurdle, major problem, because of which the stated objectives of this agreement is not yet enforceable or not yet implemented. This is the context, right? Now we'll understand more about this particular agreement. So first of all, let me tell you the difference between the maritime zones. We have, right, four types of zones. First one is the territorial zone, contiguous zone, exclusive economic zone, and fourth is the high seas. So for example, from the shoreline, which we also refer to as baseline, right, up to 12 nautical miles is the territorial sea. Up to 12 nautical miles. Now from the shore up to 24 nautical miles, this is 24 nautical miles, we have the contiguous zone. This is the contiguous zone. Then from the shore up to 200 nautical miles is the exclusive economic zone. So this is 200 nautical mile, this is the exclusive economic zone. 3. Beyond the exclusive, that is beyond 200 nautical miles, we have the high seas. What is the difference between these four maritime zones? Now, territorial sea, which means the coastal state will have the sovereign rights over this territorial sea, which means the way the state has sovereignty on the land, the state will have sovereignty, that is complete control over the territorial sea. Which means the coastal state can prevent any foreign ship from entering the territorial sea. They will allow the foreign ships to pass through the sea as long as they are not harming the interests of this coastal state. Then we have contiguous zone. Now the coastal state won't have the same control, same sovereignty as it had on the territorial sea, which means the control of the coastal state diminishes in the contiguous zone, that is beyond 12 nautical miles. Now this exclusive economic zone is that zone wherein the coastal state has the sovereign rights to mine the resources, or exploit, use the resources under the water. And beyond the EEZ, that is high seas, the coastal state will not have any control, which means these are international waters, the high seas. I hope you understood the difference between four maritime zones. Now, what is this agreement? This again, the agreement that we discussed, right, is an very important international agreement or treaty under the UNCLOS. UNCLOS stands for United Nations Conventions Laws of Seas. United Nations Conventions on Laws of the Seas. This treaty. Then what is the purpose? We discussed protection of marine biodiversity, that is to preserve the resources under the sea. Now, in order to make this agreement successful, it is very important that the countries should coordinate and cooperate with respect to the provisions of this agreement so as to make this agreement successful. Now, another provision of this agreement is that the coastal state cannot claim sovereign rights in the high seas, that is international waters. It indicates that the resources in the high seas should be equally distributed among all the countries. It indicates that the developed countries should not exploit the resources in the high seas. Now, another key provision of this agreement is that it is area-based management tool, which means it adopts area-based management tools, which means certain areas are designated as marine protected areas. What? Under this area based, certain areas are designated as marine protected areas, which means in the marine protected areas, the human activities like fishing, mining of resources is regulated. Or there are some areas where the human activities are totally banned. This is referred to as area based management tools. Based on the area, this agreement decides if fishing, or for that matter mining, exploitation or usage can be allowed or not. Then every human activity has to pass the environment impact assessment test, which means all the activities that will be undertaken below the water will go through this test. Now this test will ensure the potential harm of the human activities on the marine resources. Environment impact assessment. This test will see the impact or assessment of the human activities on the marine resources, right? Then contribution to what is SDG? Sustainable Development Goal number 14, which is life below water and the protection of life below water. So this agreement contributes to SDG goal number 14, which is protecting life underwater. Now, this agreement was finalized in the year 2023, that is March 2023, which means 88 countries signed this agreement, BBI, Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Agreement, right? Out of which only 2 countries have ratified it. See, what is the difference between signing and ratification? Signing, which means you agree with the objectives of the agreement. When you ratify the agreement, you are legally bound to abide by the provisions of the agreement. This is the difference. Only 2 countries have ratified it. Now, this agreement will be enforced only when 60 countries ratify it. As of now, only 2 countries have ratified it. When 60 countries ratify it, then this agreement or the provisions of the agreement will be enforceable. And once the 60 countries ratified, post that after 120 days, this agreement will be legally binding on all the countries. Right? I hope you have understood the ratification progress of the BBN agreement. Now, what are the objectives of this agreement? One, it protects the marine protected areas, right? The objective is to increase the marine protected areas, which currently is 1.4% of the total ocean space. So the objective is to increase the marine protected areas. The next one is marine genetic resources. Now, what are marine genetic resources? These are the genetic resources that are found in the marine organisms like plants and animals underwater, right? And these genetic resources are used in these sectors like pharmaceutical, food industry, then cosmetics, etc. Which means that the benefits derived out of the genetic resources should be equally shared with all the countries. See, what happens is that the developed countries have the technology, have the capacity to mine the resources in the high seas, but the poor countries do not have that money. So this agreement says that the resources in the high seas should be used by all the countries, or rather the developed countries should fund the global fund. Why? Because they are using the resources of the world. That's the reason they have to contribute to the global fund, and the money from the global fund will be used to help the developing countries. And environment impact assessment, I already explained you what this EIS stands for. Then what are the challenges? The first and foremost is lack of clear implementation. Why? Because only 2 countries have ratified it. We have to wait until the 60 countries have ratified the agreement. Second, there are marine disputes. For example, in South China Sea, China has marine disputes with countries like Philippines, Japan, right, Indonesia, etc. Then equitable resource sharing. Now, often we have seen or observed that the developed countries never share the resources with the developing countries. This is another challenge. Disparities in capacity. Now, the developed countries have the capacity and technology to mine the resources, but the developing countries do not have. This is a difference that we have to plug in. And finally, ignoring the interconnected marine ecosystem, which means this agreement fails to connect the activities in coastal space, that is territorial waters and high seas, which means the fact of the matter is the activities in the coastal area or territorial waters will impact the marine resources or marine organisms in the high seas. So this agreement has failed to understand the interconnectedness between the territorial water and the high seas. So these are some of the challenges. I hope you understood the challenges. And way forward, you can read it in the DNA notes. It's very simple, very easy to understand. Now let us try to discuss a question. Which of the following provisions is most closely associated with the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Agreement, also known as High Seas Treaty? First one, establishment of marine protected areas. Yes. Regulation of deep sea mining activities. No. Mandating environment impact assessment. Yes. Fourth one, financial assistance to low income. No. This one is incorrect, which means A and C is the correct answer for question number. For the last question, right? So we also discussed this point, right? So that's it from our DNA session. I hope you understood all the 4 topics that we discussed. Students, I request you to please make sure that you are revising the topics, right? You can open the link in the comment box and refer to the DNA notes for your revision, but make sure you have holistic understanding with each and every topic that we discuss every day, right? On this note, I call it a wrap. Thank you so much for watching, and before we end this video, I request you to please hit the like, share and subscribe button. Thank you so much.